You stopped chasing, you stopped texting, you stopped waiting. The silence you used to dread, now it's your sanctuary. But just when you start to breathe again, they come back with sweetness, with softness, with just the right words. And it's not because they've changed. It's because they've noticed you have. Let me be clear. This isn't love. This is control wearing perfume. They don't disappear from your bed, they disappear from your soul. And that's the real heartbreak most people don't talk about when they're entangled with someone who fears intimacy. One of the most overlooked ways avoidants manipulate in a relationship is through sexual inconsistency. It's not just about how often you're physically intimate, it's about the why behind the pattern and how it slowly erodes your sense of security and self-worth. The push-pull game doesn't stop at communication. It bleeds into how they touch you, how they withhold affection, and how they use your craving for closeness as a weapon of control. When things are good or when you're pulling away, they suddenly become warm, available, even sexually attentive. They lean in, they initiate. Their body language screams closeness. It feels like you're finally getting through to them. You breathe easier for a moment, thinking maybe the breakthrough has arrived. But then out of nowhere, it turns cold again. They become disinterested, unresponsive, even irritated at your need for intimacy. You're left wondering what you did wrong. Did you ask too much? Were you too available, too affectionate? But the truth is, it was never about you. It was always about their need to control emotional proximity, and sex just happens to be one of the most powerful tools to do it. There's a hidden pattern that avoidants follow when they sense you're starting to detach emotionally. It threatens their illusion of power, and the way they attempt to regain control is by giving you just enough physical attention to re-engage you. It's not about deep connection, it's about keeping you tethered. They initiate sex not out of desire, but out of strategic timing. And it works because for someone who's been starving for connection, even crumbs feel like a feast. You lean back in, you start hoping again, you make excuses for the emotional distance because you've been given something that feels like closeness, even if it's only skin deep. But what's dangerous is the emotional aftermath. After those moments of physical intimacy, you often feel more distant than ever. The body was present, but the soul wasn't. You reached for closeness and walked away emptier. It's the intimacy hangover. Avoidants leave behind the high of physical connection, followed by the low of emotional withdrawal. This cycle becomes addicting because it's unpredictable. You never know when they'll be warm or when they'll turn cold. You start to calibrate your worth based on their moods. You walk on eggshells, become overly accommodating, and start minimizing your needs just to keep them from retreating again. That's when the damage begins. Not just in the bedroom, but in your sense of self. You start performing for intimacy, hoping your compliance will earn you affection. You start suppressing your emotions so you don't scare them off. You start believing that love is conditional and that closeness is a reward you have to earn through silence, patience, and sacrifice. You can be fully naked with someone and still feel unseen. That's the paradox of being physically close to an avoidant partner. On the surface, everything seems fine. They touch you, they kiss you, they might even say all the right words in the heat of the moment. But something's missing, something intangible but deeply felt. It's the emotional current, the kind that makes real intimacy electric. And when it's absent, no matter how intense the physical act may seem, you're left feeling hollow, like you were only partially invited into the experience. Avoidants are often terrified of this kind of vulnerability, not just emotionally but physically as well, and it shows up in how they engage during intimacy. You may have noticed it, the way they avoid prolonged eye contact during sex, the way their body stiffens when you try to deepen emotional closeness, the way their gestures feel performative rather than connective. It's not that they don't enjoy sex, it's that they don't know how to let go in a way that requires their heart to show up. Because showing up in that way means being seen. It means allowing someone into the spaces they've spent years guarding. And for the avoidant, that level of exposure feels dangerous, even suffocating. When you initiate closeness, not just physically but emotionally, they interpret it as pressure. Your desire for emotional merging is read as threat. They pull back, not because they don't care, but because they equate intimacy with loss of control. Vulnerability to them isn't a bridge. It's a battlefield, so they compartmentalize. They separate sex from emotional connection. They might be physically present, but they're mentally elsewhere, emotionally armored, and spiritually closed off. What you get is a shell of intimacy, something that mimics closeness, but never quite lands where it should. And over time, this starts to confuse your body. You crave that emotional, spiritual closeness, but instead you get fragments. They give you the physical without the emotional. They give you skin without soul. And when you begin to speak up, when you ask for more presence, more passion, more vulnerability, they become distant. They may even accuse you of being too sensitive, too needy, too demanding. But it's not a demand to want to feel loved. It's not unreasonable to want presence during intimacy. What they're truly resisting isn't you. It's the loss of control that intimacy demands. Sex becomes something safe for them only when it remains disconnected. They may even thrive on passion in the beginning stages, when things are casual, light, undefined, but as emotional stakes rise, their fear deepens, their body starts to echo their internal conflict. Intimacy turns mechanical, gestures become routine, and their touch lacks depth. You begin to sense that you're not being met, not really, you're being touched, but not felt, kissed, but not known, loved, but not held in your entirety. They don't apologize with words. They apologize with their bodies. When they sense you've emotionally detached, they don't come back with heartfelt accountability or honest reflection. They come back with soft touches, flirtatious glances, and a sudden surge of sexual energy. It's their most deceptive move because on the surface, it feels like connection. It looks like reconciliation. But underneath, it's strategy. Avoidants often use physical intimacy as a reset button, a way to bypass the work of rebuilding trust or emotional closeness. They don't want to unpack the damage they caused. They just want to press fast forward back to comfort, back to your availability, back to their control. The moment they notice your energy shift, the moment you stop reaching out, stop asking, stop begging, they panic, not outwardly. No, their panic is subtle, calculated. It shows up as seduction. They might suddenly be more physically affectionate. They might act as though the intimacy that's been missing for weeks is suddenly overflowing. But it's not real closeness, it's bait. The sex feels different now, not because it's more passionate, but because it's designed to confuse you. It's meant to pull you back into the cycle, to make you question your instincts, to convince you that maybe things are shifting, maybe they are finally opening up. But sex, in this moment, isn't a reflection of deeper connection. It's a cover, a mask, a deflection from the real issues they're unwilling to confront. They'd rather give you their body than give you their heart, because vulnerability through physicality feels less dangerous than vulnerability through words. It requires no explanations, no accountability, no raw honesty, just skin on skin, just enough to remind you of what it could be, but never enough to actually build what it should be. What's dangerous is how effective this tactic can be, especially if you've been starving for affection, for closeness, for a sign that they still care. In the middle of that moment, you feel the illusion of reconnection. Your body responds, your guard drops, you start to hope again. You start to believe that this time, it might be different, and that's exactly what they want. Not because they're ready to step up, but because they're terrified of losing the emotional upper hand. Once the encounter ends, the distance creeps back in, they go quiet. Aloof, detached, you feel the emotional whiplash again, the sting of being drawn close just to be pushed away, and now the pain cuts deeper. Because for a brief moment, you believed them. You believed the way they held you meant something had changed, but change never arrived, only manipulation, disguised as intimacy. What makes this cycle so powerful is the way it trains your body to override your mind. Even when the red flags are clear, even when your gut is screaming, your nervous system still craves that brief contact, that flash of closeness, that illusion of love. You begin to notice it in the small moments, the way everything about intimacy has to happen on their terms. They decide when to engage and when to withdraw. They set the tempo, the tone, the boundaries. You're constantly adjusting, trying to read their signals, trying to match their energy. But deep down, you know something isn't right. You feel it in your body first. That subtle tension in your chest when you reach for them and sense hesitation. That confusion when your needs are met with silence, or worse, dismissal. With an avoidant partner, physical and emotional intimacy aren't shared experiences, they're conditional offers, and only granted when it benefits their sense of control. When you're close, but not too close, they'll let you in. When you're soft, receptive, and expecting nothing, they might engage, but the moment you need something from them emotionally, or seek consistency, or ask for deeper connection, the wall goes up. Their withdrawal is subtle but powerful. They might become colder, briefer, even less physically affectionate. And you're left wondering if you've done something wrong. The truth is, you didn't. But avoidants associate closeness with emotional danger. So when intimacy starts to feel too real, too mutual, too vulnerable, they pull back to reestablish control over the emotional atmosphere. What's worse is that they rarely acknowledge this shift. You'll never hear them say, "I'm withdrawing because I'm overwhelmed." Instead, they'll act like nothing's changed, leaving you gaslighting yourself. You start to lower your needs to match their comfort zone. You stop asking for connection. You stop expressing what you truly desire. You become afraid of being too much, so you shrink. You silence yourself in the hopes that their affection will return if you can just stay small enough to fit within their limits. But intimacy, real intimacy, cannot survive in a one-sided dynamic. It needs reciprocity, vulnerability, safety. With an avoidant, you're often denied all three. They withhold touch when you comfort. They avoid eye contact when you seek closeness. They give you physical affection only when it aligns with their emotional regulation, not yours. And every time you comply, every time you accept their version of connection on their terms, you reinforce the imbalance. You teach them that your boundaries are negotiable, your needs are optional, and your body is accessible even when your heart is not seen. This leads to an intimacy that feels more like a performance than a partnership. You begin to measure every move, filter every word, just to avoid triggering their discomfort. You become emotionally exhausted from dancing around their walls, hoping one day they'll let you in fully. But instead, they stay in control by keeping intimacy limited, surface-level, transactional. They decide when the door opens and when it shuts, and you're expected to adapt, to wait, to stay grateful for crumbs. And each time they retreat after giving you a glimpse of connection, it reinforces the power they hold. They'll light a fire just to distract you from the cold. That's what avoidants do when emotional intimacy becomes too overwhelming. They redirect connection into something they can control, sex. But not the kind of sex that brings hearts closer, the kind of sex that masks disconnection with performance. It becomes a decoy, a carefully crafted illusion of closeness. To the outside world, even to you at times, it looks like passion. It looks like chemistry, but if you look closer, it's hollow. It's a ritual of avoidance, wrapped in the appearance of desire. The avoidant doesn't run from sex. They run from the emotions it can evoke. And by sexualizing connection, they keep your attention locked on the physical, while starving the emotional. When you try to have a difficult conversation, they might reach for you instead of responding. When you cry, they may kiss you rather than sit with your feelings. When you feel hurt, they might pull you into a physical embrace instead of offering words or empathy. It feels soothing in the moment, but what you're receiving isn't comfort, it's redirection. They don't want to feel what you feel. They don't want to engage emotionally because it requires them to show their own vulnerability. So they offer sex in place of emotional presence, hoping you'll take that as a sign of closeness, hoping you'll confuse the act with the intention. This is how emotional bypassing begins. You start to equate touch with care. You start believing that if they sleep with you, they must still love you. That if they're still physically attracted to you, the bond must still be intact. But what you're experiencing isn't intimacy. It's avoidance disguised as affection. They use the high of physical closeness to neutralize emotional discomfort. Not just their own, but yours too. It keeps the relationship functional on the surface, while everything underneath stays unresolved. There's no emotional growth, no deepening, just a repeated cycle of avoidance through desire. What makes this dynamic so confusing is that it doesn't feel toxic right away. It feels intoxicating. The chemistry is there, the attraction is strong, and those intense moments of connection trick your nervous system into believing things are okay again. But what you don't realize is that this kind of sex often lacks aftercare. No tenderness, no emotional reflection, no check-in, just a brief moment of closeness, followed by distance. You start to feel used, even when the sex is consensual, because your heart was in it every time, and theirs was never fully present. Eventually, your body starts to recognize the pattern. You begin to feel anxious even during intimacy. You anticipate the withdrawal that follows. You stop trusting the moments of closeness because they're always followed by silence. The sex becomes more about keeping the relationship alive than expressing love. And the worst part, you start giving into it, not because you want to, but because it's the only way to feel connected at all. They don't evolve, they regress. That's the final, most deceptive move avoidants make when they realize they're losing their grip. When your energy shifts, when your heart detaches, when your silence replaces your longing, they sense it. And instead of rising into maturity, instead of meeting you at the level you always hoped for, they retreat into an earlier version of themselves. The version that charmed you, the version that made you believe they were emotionally available, the version that made promises with their presence, even if not with their words. It's not growth, it's emotional shapeshifting, and sex becomes their stage. This regression shows up as a sudden emotional availability, a softness you haven't seen in months. They say things like, "I miss us, I've been thinking," or "Remember when things were good between us?" It's seductive. It plays to your memories. It tugs at your nostalgia. And then to seal the illusion, they initiate physical closeness, the kind that mimics emotional depth but isn't rooted in any real accountability. You feel their body press into yours, and you wonder, is this real this time? But what's actually happening is far more manipulative. They are using your history against you. They're offering sex, not as a reflection of love, but as a counterfeit currency of connection. What's dangerous about this tactic is how convincing it is. Avoidants are masters at making you question your progress. Right when you begin to heal, right when your boundaries strengthen, they slip back in with intimacy that feels different. They act more present, more passionate, even more attuned. You begin to believe the narrative you desperately wanted. Maybe they do love me. Maybe they have changed. But what's really changed is you, and that threatens their comfort zone. Your detachment is the wake-up call they never expected, not because they miss your soul, but because they miss your emotional availability. They miss the version of you that waited, that overgave, that tolerated their avoidance. So they give you just enough physical intimacy to reawaken your emotional investment. And it works because your body remembers. It remembers the connection, the craving, the closeness. But this isn't healing, it's re-entry into the cycle. You feel it the moment the high fades. After the sex, the eye contact isn't sustained. The emotional follow-through is absent. The promises are implied but never fulfilled. You realize that once again they've seduced you back into hope without any real foundation for it. The emotional regression isn't accidental, it's deliberate. It's a tactic born from fear, not love. They don't return as a changed partner. They return as a skilled manipulator who knows exactly how to choose to like the person you've been waiting for. And they use intimacy as the smokescreen. It's not a desire to rebuild, it's a desperation to not be replaced. When they feel you've finally reclaimed your power, they use the same tools they once withheld, affection, attention, sex, as a final attempt to pull you back under their emotional spell.